The worst kind of heartbreak is the one nobody sees. My fingers would not stop shaking. I curled them tighter around the paper cup, hoping nobody would notice. The coffee inside had gone cold nearly 20 minutes ago, but I kept holding it anyway. It gave me something to do besides cry. The charity gala sparkled behind me through the glass doors of the hotel ballroom. Laughter drifted into the night air. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors. Wealthy donors smiled for cameras. Teachers, administrators, and community leaders celebrated another successful fundraiser for local schools. At least that was what everyone else saw. What I saw was humiliation. I stared down at the folded letter in my lap. My teaching contract renewal had been denied. Not because of poor performance. Not because of complaints from parents. Not because I had failed my students. The school board had decided to eliminate my position after years of service. Just like that. No warning. No conversation. No chance to defend myself. 3 weeks before summer break. 3 weeks before rent was due. 3 weeks before my entire life became uncertain. The worst part was knowing exactly who had pushed for it. A supervisor who had spent months taking credit for my work while quietly positioning me as the easiest person to replace. Inside the ballroom, she was probably smiling right now. Probably accepting congratulations. Probably telling everyone how much she cared about education. My vision blurred again. I blinked rapidly. It did not help. A tear slipped free anyway. Then another. I lowered my head and pressed a hand against my forehead. I hated crying. Especially in public. Especially over people who did not deserve that kind of power over me. The hotel garden sat nearly empty this late in the evening. Small lights glowed along stone pathways lined with white roses. A fountain murmured softly somewhere nearby. I thought I was alone. That was why I came out here. Because sometimes loneliness felt easier when nobody could witness it. I was wrong. Footsteps echoed against the stone path. Slow. Unhurried. Confident. I quickly wiped my face and looked away. Maybe whoever it was would keep walking. Maybe they would respect the universal rule that said people crying alone should be left alone. The footsteps stopped. My stomach tightened instantly. Silence stretched between us. I could feel someone standing nearby. Watching. Not in a cruel way. Not in a curious way. Just present. I finally glanced up. The man standing beneath the garden lights looked completely out of place among the flowers. Tall. Dark suit. Broad shoulders. Calm eyes that seemed to notice everything without revealing anything. I recognized him immediately. Everyone at the gala did. Luca Romano. The Sicilian businessman whose donations funded half the event. Powerful. Wealthy. Untouchable. The kind of man who belonged in headlines, not quiet gardens. He studied me for a moment. Then his gaze dropped briefly to the crumpled letter still clenched in my hand. Something changed in his expression. Not pity. Something far more dangerous. Concern. For the first time all night, I felt truly seen. And somehow that terrified me more than the tears ever had. My first instinct was to stand up and leave. Not because Luca Romano had done anything wrong. Because he had not. That was the problem. Kindness felt unfamiliar tonight. Dangerous, even. I quickly folded the letter and slipped it into my purse. I am fine, I said. The lie sounded weak the moment it left my mouth. Luca glanced toward the ballroom where music drifted through the open doors before returning his attention to me. You do not look fine. A nervous laugh escaped me. That is a terrible thing to say to someone. I prefer honesty. Somehow that answer felt exactly like him. Direct. Unapologetic. Impossible to argue with. I looked away toward the fountain. Water shimmered beneath soft garden lights. It has been a long night. I can see that. Silence settled between us again. Not uncomfortable. Just strange. Most people rushed to fill empty space with meaningless conversation. Luca seemed perfectly comfortable letting the quiet exist. He reached into his jacket pocket and offered a neatly folded handkerchief. White linen. Simple. Elegant. I stared at it for a second before accepting it. Thank you. You're welcome. I dabbed at my eyes and immediately felt embarrassed. Here I was sitting in a hotel garden crying in front of one of the most powerful men in the city. Not exactly how I imagined the evening ending. You know, I said softly, I usually do a better job pretending everything is okay. A faint smile appeared. That sounds exhausting. The answer caught me off guard because it was true. Completely true. Exhausting. That was exactly what it felt like. I spent my days helping children believe in themselves, encouraging them after bad grades, comforting them when life felt unfair. Yet, somehow I never extended the same kindness to myself. Luca sat on the opposite bench, giving me space. "Can I ask you something?" he said. My stomach tightened unexpectedly. "I suppose." His gaze never left mine. Calm. Steady. Impossible to ignore. Then he asked the question that would stay with me for weeks. "Who made you cry?" The words landed harder than they should have. Not because I did not know the answer. Because I knew it too well. My supervisor. The board members who never bothered learning my name. The people who smiled in public and made decisions behind closed doors. The friends who disappeared when things became inconvenient. The answer was complicated. The answer was years long. I looked down at my hands. It does not matter. It matters if it brought you out here alone. I swallowed hard. You do not even know me. No, his voice softened slightly. But I know what it looks like when someone is carrying more than they should. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sounds of the gala continued behind us. Applause erupted somewhere inside the ballroom. Life moving forward as if nothing had happened. I stood up before he could ask another question. "Thank you for the handkerchief." Luca rose as well. "Madison." Hearing my name from him felt strangely personal. I paused. "Yes." His expression turned serious. "Whatever happened tonight is not the end of your story." My chest tightened unexpectedly. Then I turned and walked back toward the hotel. Halfway to the doors, I glanced over my shoulder. Luca was still standing beside the fountain watching me leave. And for the first time all evening, I had the unsettling feeling that someone intended to find out exactly why I had been crying. The next morning began at 6:30 with the sound of my alarm and the familiar feeling of exhaustion sitting on my chest. For a few seconds, I forgot about the gala. Forgot about the letter. Forgot about Luca Romano standing beneath garden lights asking questions nobody else had bothered to ask. Then reality returned all at once. I stared at the ceiling of my small apartment and wondered how I was supposed to walk back into school knowing my future had already been decided by people who never stepped inside my classroom. By 8 o'clock, I was standing in front of 23 third graders pretending everything was normal. Fortunately, children made pretending easier. They did not care about contracts or politics. They cared about spelling tests, science projects, and whether the class hamster seemed lonely. For a few hours, I almost forgot my own problems. Almost. During lunch, I sat alone in my classroom grading papers while the rest of the staff gathered in the teacher's lounge. Laughter echoed down the hallway. I recognized one voice immediately. Denise Harper. My supervisor. The woman responsible for making sure everyone believed my position was no longer necessary. I lowered my eyes and continued grading. It was easier that way. Less painful. Less disappointing. The classroom door opened unexpectedly. I looked up, expecting a student. Instead, a delivery man stood there holding a large white box. "Madison Parker?" he asked. "That is me." He smiled and handed it over. "Have a good day." Before I could ask who sent it, he was already gone. Confused, I carried the box to my desk. Inside sat enough sandwiches, fruit, and bottled water to feed half the faculty. A small card rested on top. 3 words were written in neat handwriting. "Eat your lunch." I stared at the note for several seconds. Then I laughed. A real laugh. The first one in days. There was no signature. None was necessary. Somehow that made me smile even more. Across town, far beyond my tiny classroom and my shrinking world, someone had remembered that I skipped meals when I was stressed. The realization should have bothered me. Instead, it felt strangely comforting. By the end of the school day, another surprise waited. The principal called me into her office. My stomach immediately dropped. More bad news. More paperwork. More disappointment. At least that was what I expected. Madison, she said carefully, I need to ask you something. I sat down. Okay. She folded her hands together. Several parents contacted the district this afternoon. I blinked. About what? About you. My heart sank. Then she smiled. Apparently, they are demanding an explanation for why one of the most popular teachers in the school is being let go. I stared at her in complete shock. What? She slid a stack of letters across the desk. Parents. Former students. Community members. Dozens of them. Every page filled with praise, support, and stories I barely remembered. My vision blurred again, but this time for a completely different reason. As I left the office, my phone vibrated. One message. Unknown number. I already knew who it was. The text contained only a single sentence. The people who matter already know who you are. And for the first time since receiving that letter at the gala, hope felt possible. Hope is a dangerous thing when you have spent too long expecting disappointment. For the next few days, I carried that feeling carefully, almost afraid to trust it. The letters from parents remained stacked on my kitchen table. Every morning before work, I read one or two. Not because I needed reassurance. Because I needed reminding. Reminding that my value had never depended on the opinion of a single supervisor. Reminding that the years I spent helping children mattered. Reminding that I was more than a contract renewal form sitting on someone's desk. Unfortunately, not everyone seemed happy about the sudden support gathering around me. By Thursday afternoon, whispers had begun spreading through the school. Conversations stopped when I entered the faculty lounge. Smiles became strained. Invitations disappeared. It was subtle enough that nobody could point to a specific problem, yet obvious enough that everyone felt it. Denise Harper looked particularly uncomfortable. During a staff meeting, she avoided making eye contact with me entirely. That alone told me more than any rumor ever could. When the meeting ended, I remained behind to organize papers while the other teachers filtered into the hallway. Denise paused at the door. For a moment, I thought she might finally explain everything. Instead, she offered a tight smile. You seem to have a lot of supporters. I did not ask anyone to write letters. Of course not. Her tone remained pleasant. Too pleasant. Then she left. I stared after her, feeling more confused than satisfied. Across town, someone else appeared far less confused. That evening, I arrived home to find a black sedan parked across the street. Not hidden. Not trying to be discreet. Simply there. The sight should have surprised me. It did not. My phone vibrated almost immediately. Unknown number. I smiled before opening the message. Did you eat dinner today? I shook my head and laughed softly. Who asks that? The response arrived less than 10 seconds later. Someone who already knows the answer. I stared at the screen. Then typed back. That sounds very confident. Another message appeared. You skip lunch too. My eyes widened. That is unsettling. The typing bubble appeared almost instantly. Yet accurate. Against my better judgment, I found myself smiling. It had been a long time since anyone paid attention to the small details of my life. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. Nothing dramatic. No grand declarations. Just questions. Coffee or tea? Favorite childhood book? The most difficult student I had ever taught. Simple things. Human things. By the time I set my phone down, the apartment felt a little less empty. The next afternoon brought another surprise. The school board announced an emergency review of recent staffing decisions. Faculty members gathered in clusters throughout the building discussing possibilities. Nobody knew what had triggered the sudden change. Nobody except me. Deep down, I suspected someone had started asking uncomfortable questions. Someone with enough influence to make powerful people nervous. As classes ended, I walked toward the parking lot carrying a stack of student projects. A familiar black sedan waited near the curb. Luca Romano leaned casually against the passenger door. Sunlight reflected off the windshield behind him. Several teachers nearly walked into each other staring. I stopped in my tracks. Luca looked up from his phone and smiled slightly. Good afternoon, Madison. My pulse betrayed me immediately. What are you doing here? His gaze drifted toward the school building before returning to me. Calm, certain, amused, making sure nobody forgets how valuable you are. For a moment, I could only stare at him. The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the parking lot while teachers pretended not to watch from nearby sidewalks. Luca Romano looked completely unaffected by the attention, as if arriving at an elementary school was the most ordinary thing in the world. "You cannot just show up here," I said quietly. "Apparently I can." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. I rolled my eyes before I could stop myself. To my surprise, that seemed to amuse him. "Do you realize every person in this parking lot is staring?" His gaze drifted toward the building. "Yes. And you do not care?" "No," the answer came so quickly that I laughed despite myself. For weeks, I had been carrying stress like a second heartbeat. Yet somehow this man kept finding ways to make me forget it for a few seconds at a time. "Why are you here?" I finally asked. Luca opened the passenger door of the sedan. "You have not eaten." I stared at him. "That is your reason?" "It is an excellent reason. It is 4 o'clock." "Exactly." I shook my head, but 10 minutes later I was sitting across from him at a quiet restaurant overlooking the harbor. The city stretched beyond the windows. Ferries crossed the water. Sunlight reflected across the waves in bright ribbons of silver. A basket of warm bread sat between us. Luca waited until I finished half of it before speaking. "Better." "You are impossible." "That is not what people usually call me." Something about the answer made me curious. "What do people usually call you?" He leaned back slightly. "Things they would never say to my face." I laughed again. The sound felt easier now. Natural. As if some part of me was slowly waking up after a very long sleep. Dinner arrived. Conversation followed. For the first time, we talked about things unrelated to school. Sicily. Childhood memories. Books. Travel. The children in my classroom. Luca listened carefully whenever I spoke about my students. Not politely. Genuinely. That surprised me more than anything. "You really love teaching," he said at one point. "Of course I do. Even after everything that happened?" I looked out the window. "Especially after everything that happened." He studied me quietly. "That is rare." "What is?" "Most people become bitter." The truth was that I had come close. Closer than anyone knew. Before I could answer, my phone vibrated. An email notification appeared across the screen. School District Administration. My pulse immediately quickened. "What is it?" Luca asked. I opened the message. "Read the first line. Then the second. Then the third." My breath caught completely. "Madison." I looked up at him. The board reviewed my case. His expression sharpened. "And?" I stared at the screen again just to make sure I was reading it correctly. "They reversed the decision." Silence followed. Then relief hit me so hard it nearly hurt. My eyes filled with tears before I could stop them. Not sadness this time. Something entirely different. Across the table, Luca watched me carefully. A slow smile appeared. Warm. Genuine. Almost proud. And in that moment, I realized something that frightened me far more than losing any job ever could. The person whose opinion mattered most to me was no longer sitting across a boardroom table. He was sitting across from me. The email changed everything, but not in the way I expected. For years, I had measured my worth through work, through lesson plans, through long evenings spent helping struggling students, through every sacrifice nobody ever noticed. Seeing the board reverse its decision should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like relief. Quiet. Steady. The kind that settles into your chest after carrying a burden for too long. Luca seemed to understand that without me saying a word. We remained at the restaurant long after dinner ended. The harbor outside glowed beneath the evening sky. Boats drifted across dark water. City lights reflected like scattered stars. "You are very calm for someone who just got her job back," he observed. I smiled softly. "I think I already spent all my energy worrying." A faint laugh escaped him. Fair answer. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Comfortable silence had become surprisingly normal between us. Then curiosity finally got the better of me. "Can I ask you something?" Luca leaned back slightly. "You usually do." How much of this was you? His expression remained perfectly composed. Too composed. That depends. On what? On whether you are asking as a teacher or as a detective. I laughed to spite myself. Luca. Madison. Seriously. His smile faded into something gentler. I asked a few questions. A few questions? The right questions. The answer told me everything. Somehow he had managed to shine light into corners where nobody wanted attention. Not through threats. Not through pressure. Simply by making people accountable. I should have been frustrated. Instead, gratitude settled quietly inside me. Thank you, I said. Luca's gaze met mine. You earned that outcome yourself. Maybe. No, his voice grew firmer. Definitely. The certainty in his tone made it impossible to argue. When we finally left the restaurant, the air felt warm and clean. Spring had fully arrived. The city buzzed around us with the familiar rhythm of evening traffic and distant conversations. The driver waited beside the sedan, but neither of us moved immediately. Can I tell you something? I asked. Luca nodded. The night of the gala, I thought my life was falling apart. His expression softened. I know. Now I think it was forcing me to see the truth. For a second, something flickered across his face. Pride. Relief. Maybe both. Sometimes losing the wrong thing makes room for the right thing. The words lingered between us. My heartbeat quickened unexpectedly. Not because of what he said. Because of who said it. I realized I was no longer looking forward to text messages or surprise lunches or mysterious notes. I was looking forward to him. That realization should have frightened me. Instead, it felt strangely natural. Luca opened the car door for me. I will see you tomorrow. How do you know? I asked. His eyes warmed with amusement. Because your students have a field trip tomorrow. I stared at him. How do you know that? Madison. He smiled. You have told me at least 6 times. I laughed all the way home. Later that night, as I prepared lesson materials at my kitchen table, my phone buzzed. One new message. Sleep. Big day tomorrow. I smiled and typed back. Yes, sir. The reply appeared almost instantly. Smart teacher. I set the phone down, still smiling. Then another notification arrived seconds later. This one was not from Luca. It was from the school district. Emergency board meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning regarding recent administrative findings. My smile slowly faded. Something told me this story was not finished yet. The next morning, I arrived at school carrying more uncertainty than lesson plans. The emergency board meeting hung over the building like a storm cloud nobody wanted to acknowledge. Teachers gathered in small groups whispering near classroom doors. Administrators moved through hallways with forced smiles and hurried steps. Even the students seemed to sense something unusual in the air. By 10 o'clock, the field trip buses had departed, and I was standing beside a group of excited third graders at the City Science Museum trying to focus on anything except the notification still sitting in my inbox. Fortunately, children have a remarkable ability to pull you back into the present. For 2 hours, I answered questions about planets, dinosaurs, and electricity. I laughed more than I had expected. I almost forgot to worry. Almost. My phone remained silent until lunchtime. Then it vibrated once. Luca, how is the field trip? I smiled before answering. Nobody has broken anything yet. A reply appeared immediately. Impressive. Keep me updated. The simplicity of the exchange warmed me more than it should have. By the time we returned to school later that afternoon, the atmosphere had changed completely. Conversations had stopped. Hallways felt strangely quiet. The principal stood near the front office speaking with several district representatives. When she saw me, relief crossed her face. Madison, she called. Can you come with me for a moment? My stomach tightened instantly. The office conference room was full when I entered. Board members. Administrators. District officials. Denise Harper sat at the far end of the table looking unusually pale. Nobody smiled. Nobody spoke until the superintendent finally cleared his throat. Miss Parker, we owe you an apology. I blinked. Once. Twice. Certain I had misheard him. The superintendent continued. The review uncovered significant concerns regarding the recommendation process used to evaluate your position. Around the table, several people shifted uncomfortably. Papers were exchanged. Reports were referenced. Procedures were discussed. Yet, through all the formal language, one fact became clear. The decision affecting my job had never been based on my performance. Evidence proved that. The room remained silent after the explanation ended. Denise never looked at me. Not once. Walking back into the hallway afterward felt surreal. Students rushed past carrying backpacks and artwork. Life continued exactly as it always had. Yet something fundamental had changed. For the first time in months, I felt free from the need to defend myself. My phone vibrated again before I reached my classroom. One message. Heard the meeting went well. I stopped walking. How do you know everything? The response took several seconds longer than usual. Because I pay attention when it matters. My heart betrayed me again. Later that evening, I found myself standing on the rooftop terrace of a downtown restaurant overlooking the city skyline. Luca stood beside the railing watching the sunset paint the buildings gold. When he turned toward me, I realized something I had been avoiding for weeks. The reason his support mattered so much had nothing to do with influence, power, or connections. It was because he had seen me at my lowest and never looked away. "Luca," I said softly. He met my eyes immediately. Yes! For a moment, I forgot every sentence I had prepared. Then I smiled. And for the first time, so did he. The sunset faded slowly, leaving the city wrapped in a sea of lights. Luca and I remained on the rooftop long after the other guests had disappeared inside. Neither of us seemed eager to leave. The evening breeze carried the distant sounds of traffic and music from somewhere below, blending into the rhythm of a city that never truly slept. For the first time in months, I felt something dangerously close to peace. That should have been enough. Instead, fear found its way back into my thoughts. Not the fear of losing my job. Not the fear of disappointing people. A different fear. The kind that appears when something starts to matter. Luca rested his arms against the railing, watching the skyline. "You are thinking too much again." I laughed softly. "How do you always know?" "Because you get quiet." His answer came without hesitation. "And your eyes stop looking at the view." I looked out across the city. He was right. I had spent the last 10 minutes staring at my own worries instead of the skyline. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Anything." I hesitated. "Why did you help me?" Luca did not answer immediately. The silence stretched just long enough to feel important. "The easy answer?" he asked. "Sure. Because I could." I smiled. "And the real answer?" His gaze shifted toward me. Calm. Honest. Unguarded in a way I had never seen before. "Because seeing you hurt bothered me more than it should have." My heart stumbled. Just once. But it was enough. The city lights blurred slightly as emotion tightened my chest. Luca looked away first, almost as if he regretted saying it out loud. "You did not know me," I whispered. "No, then why?" A faint smile appeared. "Sometimes you meet someone and recognize something good in them before they recognize it themselves." The words settled deeply inside me. For weeks, I had been rebuilding confidence piece by piece. Yet hearing that from him felt different. More personal. More meaningful. My phone vibrated suddenly, breaking the moment. I glanced at the screen. A message from one of the parents who had written a support letter. "Thank you for staying. My daughter cried when she thought you were leaving." I stared at the message for several seconds. Then another arrived. And another. Parents. Former students. Families. People whose lives I never realized I had touched. Emotion rose so quickly that I had to blink several times. Luca noticed immediately. "Good news." I nodded. "Better than good." Without thinking, I handed him the phone. He read the messages quietly. When he looked up again, something warm softened his expression. "I told you," he said. "The people who matter already know who you are." The breeze lifted a strand of hair across my face. Luca reached out instinctively, then stopped himself. The small gesture somehow meant more because he hesitated. Because he respected the space between us. Neither of us moved for a moment. Then my phone vibrated one last time. This message came from the superintendent. The district would be making a public announcement the following morning regarding the review findings and my reinstatement. I stared at the screen. Tomorrow, everything would finally be out in the open. Luca looked toward the glowing skyline before meeting my eyes again. Tomorrow changes everything, he said quietly. And for the first time, I realized I was not afraid of what came next. The announcement was released at 9 o'clock the next morning. By 9:05, every teacher in the district had seen it. By noon, parents were sharing it across community groups. By the end of the day, the story had spread far beyond our school. The review had confirmed what many people already suspected. The decision regarding my position had never reflected my work, my students, or my dedication. The district formally reinstated me and announced new oversight measures to ensure future decisions would be fair and transparent. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt grateful. Grateful for the parents who spoke up. Grateful for the students who reminded me why I loved teaching. Grateful for the second chance I almost lost. Most of all, grateful for the man who refused to let me believe I was invisible. That afternoon, I returned to my classroom and found dozens of handwritten notes waiting on my desk. Some came from current students. Others came from former students now in middle school. One simply read, "Thank you for believing in me when I did not believe in myself." I sat alone in the classroom holding that note while tears filled my eyes again. Not tears of sadness. Tears of relief. Tears of healing. Tears that felt completely different from the ones I cried in that hotel garden weeks earlier. My phone buzzed. One message. "Meet me on the rooftop." I smiled immediately. 30 minutes later, I stepped onto the rooftop terrace where this chapter of my life somehow seemed destined to end. The city stretched endlessly beneath a sky painted gold by the setting sun. Luca stood near the railing exactly where I expected him to be. Calm. Confident. Watching the skyline. He turned as I approached. "You're smiling." "I have a good reason." "I know." I laughed softly. "Of course you do." For a moment we simply stood together. The breeze carried the sounds of the city upward. Cars. Music. Life. Everything felt lighter than it had in months. "The announcement helped a lot of people," I said quietly. "Not just me." Luca nodded. "Good. You knew this would happen, did not you?" A faint smile appeared. "I hoped it would." I looked at him carefully. The man who had first appeared on the worst night of my life. The man who noticed tears everyone else ignored. The man who never demanded anything in return for his kindness. "Why did you really stay?" I asked. His expression softened immediately. "You already know the answer." "Maybe I did. But I wanted to hear it anyway." Luca stepped closer. Not enough to overwhelm the space between us. Just enough to erase the distance that had existed for too long. "The first night I saw you," he said quietly, "everyone else was celebrating. You were sitting alone trying to hide your tears." My heartbeat quickened. "And?" His eyes never left mine. And I realized I could not walk away. Emotion tightened my throat. The city lights began flickering on one by one beneath us. "You changed my life," I whispered. Luca shook his head gently. "No, Madison. You changed your own life. I only reminded you who you were." Standing there beside him, watching the skyline glow beneath the evening sky, I finally understood something important. Sometimes the people who save us are not the ones who fight our battles. Sometimes they are simply the ones who see our pain, refuse to ignore it, and stay long enough for us to find our strength again. And for the first time in a very long time, the future felt beautiful.